The message came early that morning before the sun had fully climbed into the sky. No greeting. No explanation. Just one sentence. We no longer trust you. Claire stared at her phone for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the screen. It didn't shock her, not really. What unsettled her was how clean it sounded, how practiced. Like something drafted, reread, and approved before being sent. It reminded her of the termination emails she'd sent during layoffs at work, polite, distant, final. She typed back a single word. Understood. Then she set the phone face down on the kitchen table and finished her coffee as if nothing had happened. She went through her morning routine with mechanical calm, dressed for work, locked her apartment and drove off. 2 days later, while she was in the middle of a meeting, an unfamiliar number called her phone again and again. When she finally checked her voicemail, the tone had shifted completely. The voice on the message was polite. Careful. Urgent. A lawyer she had never spoken to wanted to talk. That was when Claire knew the message from her mother hadn't been an ending. It had been the opening move. Before any of that, before the lawyer and the calls and the silence that followed, Claire had been the dependable one. In her early 40s now, she had built a steady life that didn't look dramatic from the outside but held everything together. She worked a stable job, paid her bills on time and lived quietly. She wasn't the loud success story in her family. She didn't brag or post achievements online. She just handled things. When problems came up, Claire solved them. That had been her role for as long as she could remember. Growing up, she learned quickly that love in her house came wrapped in responsibility. Something broke, she fixed it. If a bill went unpaid, she covered it. If tension rose during dinner, she softened it with patience. Her mother, Linda, often said she admired Claire's independence. But that praise always came with an expectation hanging just beneath it. Because Claire could handle more, she should. And because she was the oldest, she always would. Her father rarely interfered. He stayed quiet, nodded along, and avoided asking questions. Silence, he believed, kept the peace. Then there was her younger sister, Megan. Megan was charming, emotional, and always just one step away from things working out. A job ended unexpectedly. A bill came at the wrong time. A plan needed just a little more help. Their parents worried about her endlessly. Don't judge, Claire was told. Be patient. Family helps family. And so Claire did. For years she stepped in without being asked directly. Mortgage payments. Utility bills. Repairs after storms. Insurance when something went wrong. No one ever sat her down and said thank you. It was simply assumed. From the outside, the family looked close. Holiday dinners were cheerful. Photos looked warm. Conversations stayed polite and light. But underneath, there was an imbalance Claire couldn't name yet. She wasn't included in decisions. She was informed after they were made. When things went well, it was everyone's success. When something needed fixing, it quietly became her responsibility. Claire didn't realize how deeply she had accepted that role until one sentence stripped it away. The warning signs hadn't appeared all at once. They crept in quietly. A charge on her account that didn't match what she remembered paying. A bill she was sure she'd already handled arriving again. When Claire asked questions, the answers were always the same. It's temporary. We'll fix it next month. Don't make this a big deal. Eventually she stopped asking. That was the first real mistake. One afternoon, while waiting in line at the grocery store, she scrolled through her phone and froze. A photo had been posted online. Her parents stood in front of the family house, smiling broadly. Megan stood between them, arms linked with their mother. The caption talked about new beginnings and pride. The comments praised Megan for holding everything together. Claire read it twice. Her name wasn't mentioned. Not once. She paid for her groceries, put her phone away, and drove home with that familiar tight feeling in her chest, the one she had learned to ignore. Ignoring it became harder after that. The family group chat shifted. Jokes landed differently. Someone commented about how nice it must be to always have support. Another person reacted with a laughing emoji. No one said Claire's name, but everyone knew who they meant. She typed responses and deleted them. She didn't want to seem sensitive. She didn't want to be difficult. Then one afternoon, while she was at the house handling yet another task that didn't feel like hers anymore, she overheard voices through the open kitchen door. Her mother's voice was calm. Megan laughed lightly. They weren't whispering. Once it's finalized, everything will be smooth, Megan said. Linda sounded relieved. Then Megan added casually, She's not family. She's just the sponsor. Claire stood still, her breath caught in her chest. Her mother didn't correct her. Claire didn't confront them. She didn't cry. She walked to her car and sat there until her hands stopped shaking. Something broke in that moment, not loudly but completely. That moment in the driveway stayed with Claire longer than she expected. Not the words themselves but the certainty behind them. Just the sponsor. It explained everything she had refused to name for years. She hadn't been part of the family structure at all. She had been a resource. A backup plan. A quiet solution that allowed everyone else to feel secure without responsibility. Sitting alone in her car, Claire didn't feel rage. She felt clarity. And once that settled in, it couldn't be undone. She drove home without music, without calling anyone, letting the silence stretch. That night, she didn't replay the conversation or imagine confrontations. She opened her laptop, turned off the overhead light, and sat at the kitchen table with only the screen glowing in front of her. "Let's see," she murmured to herself. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Calmly. Methodically. Claire began pulling records she hadn't reviewed closely in years. Bank statements. Transfers. Receipts. Insurance payments. Repair invoices. Each line felt familiar, like rereading journal entries she hadn't realized she was writing month after month. Always steady. Always on time. She created folders and labeled them carefully. House expenses. Emergency repairs. Recurring payments. When something didn't add up, she flagged it and moved on. She wasn't trying to prove betrayal yet. She was trying to understand the shape of it. The pattern became impossible to ignore. This wasn't generosity that had gone too far. It was dependence that had been normalized. "You didn't help," she said quietly to the empty room. "You carried it." The realization didn't hurt the way she thought it would. It sharpened her focus instead. A few days later, Claire scheduled a call with a lawyer. She didn't frame it as a family crisis. She asked practical questions. "What happens when someone assumes financial access without consent?" she asked. "What options exist when boundaries are crossed quietly?" The lawyer listened carefully. Asked for details. Claire answered without emotion, sticking to facts. She took notes. She didn't explain her family history or defend her choices. When the call ended, she felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Relief. That night, she slept better than she had in weeks. The next morning, her mother's message arrived. Longer this time. Still cold. Trust revoked. Access removed. Locks changed. Codes updated. Read like policy, not grief. Claire replied the same way she had before. Understood. Then she turned her phone face down and went to work. From that moment on, Claire stopped reacting and started deciding. She didn't cancel payments immediately. She didn't announce changes. She let routines continue just long enough to prepare. She gathered emails that showed expectations instead of requests. Messages that assumed her compliance. Conversations where silence had been mistaken for agreement. By the end of the week, everything was organized. Not to punish anyone. Not to embarrass them. Just to protect herself. Standing in her apartment one evening, Claire looked around and realized how little of her life actually belonged to her anymore. Even her time felt allocated elsewhere. That realization hurt more than the accusation ever had. But it also gave her resolve. "Not anymore," she said aloud. She wasn't planning revenge. She was drawing a line, one she should have drawn years earlier. 2 days after the message about changed locks, her phone rang again from an unfamiliar number. Claire let it ring. Then it rang again. When she finally answered, the voice on the other end was careful. Rehearsed. "Hello, Claire. My name is Susan Hart. I'm an attorney representing your parents." Claire listened quietly as Susan explained there had been a misunderstanding. That everyone hoped to resolve things privately. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Susan asked. "I'm busy," Claire replied. There was a pause. When would be a better time? That was when Claire understood the shift completely. 2 days earlier she had been someone they could lock out with a text. Now she was someone their lawyer couldn't afford to ignore. She didn't agree to a meeting. She didn't argue. She ended the call calmly, already knowing this was no longer about trust. It was about accountability. That afternoon, another message arrived from her mother. This one was longer, softer around the edges, carefully written. Linda said she was hurt by Claire's distance. She said family matters shouldn't involve outsiders. We can talk like adults, the message read, if you're willing. Claire read it once, then again. She noticed what wasn't there. No apology. No question. No acknowledgement of the locks or the words that had already done their damage. Claire didn't reply. She had learned that responding too quickly only reopened doors that should stay closed. Instead, she placed her phone face down and focused on her work, letting the silence speak for her. The confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened where everything in Claire's family always happened, at a gathering designed to look warm and ordinary from the outside. A room filled with relatives, polite laughter, and familiar faces pretending not to notice tension because acknowledging it would make them responsible for it. Claire arrived late on purpose. When she walked in, conversation slowed. A few smiles appeared too quickly. Megan glanced up, froze for half a second, then looked away. Linda stiffened but didn't turn around. Their father stared down at the table like it might give him instructions. Claire didn't sit. She didn't greet anyone. She waited. Eventually, Linda stood and cleared her throat, ready to steer the moment back into something manageable. "Let's all sit down," she said lightly. That was when Claire spoke. "I didn't come to argue," she said calmly. Her voice didn't shake. "I came to be clear." The room went quiet. Claire reached into her bag and placed a thin folder on the table. No drama. Just paper against wood. "For years," she continued, "I covered payments related to the house. Monthly expenses. Repairs. Insurance." Megan scoffed. "You're exaggerating." Claire slid the folder toward her. "Those are summaries. Rounded numbers. Dates. Patterns." Megan didn't touch it. Linda's voice sharpened. "Those were gifts." Claire nodded slowly. "If they were gifts, there would have been consent," she said. "There wasn't." The lawyer shifted in her seat. Claire kept going. She talked about access that had been assumed. Decisions made without her. How her name disappeared from stories where her support remained. She didn't accuse. She described. Then she said the sentence that stilled the room. "I heard how you talk about me when you think I'm not listening." Megan's face drained of color. Claire let the silence stretch before repeating the words calmly. "She's not family. She's just the sponsor." A chair scraped. Someone inhaled sharply. "That's not what she meant," their father said finally, his voice uncertain. "I know exactly what she meant," Claire replied. "Because of everything that came before and everything that followed." The lawyer leaned forward. "Claire, if we could just—" "I am taking a moment," Claire said evenly. "This one." She explained what would happen next. Not as a threat. As a process. An accounting. A return of funds taken under assumption, not agreement. Megan stood abruptly. "You can't do this. You'll ruin everything." Claire met her eyes. "It already did," she said quietly. "I'm just naming it." Linda started crying then. Not loud sobs but controlled tears, the kind she used when she wanted sympathy without admitting fault. "After everything I've done," she said softly, pressing a hand to her chest. "Families don't keep score." Claire looked at her for a long moment. "I didn't," she replied. "Until you did." The words landed heavily. The lawyer cleared her throat and asked if they could step aside to talk privately. Claire agreed to one conversation, nothing more. They moved to a quieter corner of the room, away from the watchful eyes and strained smiles. The lawyer lowered her voice. "They're willing to settle," she said carefully. "I'm not interested in quiet," Claire replied. "I'm interested in complete." The lawyer hesitated. "That may take time." Claire nodded once. It already took years. She explained that she had documentation, records, messages, even recordings. "If this goes public," Claire added calmly, "I won't control that. I'll just tell the truth." For the first time, the lawyer's composure cracked. Not enough to show fear, but enough to reveal concern. She excused herself to make a call. Across the room, Claire's family sat frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. They looked smaller somehow, like people realizing the rules they'd relied on no longer applied. When the lawyer returned, her tone had changed. Respectful. Measured. "We'll review everything," she said. "We'll be in touch within a few days." Claire nodded. "That works." As she turned to leave, Linda called her name. Claire stopped but didn't turn around. You didn't have to do it like this, her mother said. Claire looked back, then meeting her eyes. Neither did you. She walked out without another word. There was no confrontation in the parking lot. No dramatic exit. Just space, clean, quiet, and finally hers. 3 days later the lawyer called again. This time she didn't waste time. The amount will be returned in full, she said. The transfer will be completed by the end of the week. There's one condition, Claire replied. The lawyer waited. No more contact, Claire said. Not through you. Not through anyone else. There was a pause. Then, understood. When the funds arrived they did so quietly. No apology attached. No explanation. Just numbers aligning at last. Claire didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady, like something that had been leaning at the wrong angle for years had finally been set upright. In the days that followed, Claire packed slowly. Not just boxes but habits. Expectations. The reflex to check her phone whenever it buzzed. She moved to a small apartment in a different city, where the windows let in too much morning light and no one knew her last name. The family group chat disappeared from her screen. No messages replaced it. At first the silence felt unnatural. Then it felt peaceful. She slept better. Ate when she was hungry. Took weekends without explanation. People asked if it hurt to walk away. Claire always gave the same answer. It would have hurt more to stay. She hadn't lost her family. She had stopped financing a role that erased her. The first few weeks in the new city felt unreal to Claire. There was no one asking where she was, no one hinting at needs disguised as casual updates. The quiet was unfamiliar, almost suspicious. She kept expecting her phone to ring with an emergency that would pull her back into the role she had played for decades. It didn't. Instead, her days stretched open. She noticed how much energy she had once spent anticipating other people's problems. Without that weight, even small tasks felt lighter. Grocery shopping no longer came with mental calculations. Evenings were no longer interrupted by guilt disguised as obligation. One afternoon, a coworker asked casually, "Do you have family nearby?" Claire paused before answering. "Not anymore," she said, surprising herself with how calm it sounded. There was no bitterness in her voice. Just truth. She realized then that she hadn't actually lost something recently. She had been losing pieces of herself slowly for years, and now the loss had finally stopped. The grief she felt wasn't about separation. It was about recognition, seeing clearly what had always been there. Claire didn't block anyone immediately. She didn't need to. Silence had already done the work. Weeks passed without a single attempt at reconciliation. No apologies. No explanations. No accountability. That absence confirmed what words never had. The relationship had depended entirely on what she provided. Without that, there was nothing left to maintain. The clarity stung, but it also freed her. She stopped wondering what she could have done differently. She had done enough. At night, Claire sometimes replayed old moments, not to relive pain, but to reinterpret them. Conversations where her silence had been mistaken for agreement. Smiles that covered expectations. Praise that only existed as long as she was useful. Seeing those memories clearly no longer hurt the way it once did. They felt distant, like scenes from a life she had outgrown. "I wasn't weak," she said to herself one evening. "I was generous without protection." Months later, a message came through from an unknown number. It was brief. "Your mother wants to know if you're well." Claire read it once and deleted it. Not out of spite. Out of finality. Wellness, she had learned, wasn't something you owed updates about to people who only noticed you when control was slipping. She closed her phone and went back to the book she was reading, the afternoon light spilling across the page. Claire began rebuilding her life intentionally. Not dramatically. Not loudly. She took classes she had always postponed. She traveled without explaining herself. She formed friendships that didn't depend on fixing or rescuing. For the first time, her generosity had boundaries. And because of that, it lasted. She noticed how different it felt to give when it was chosen, not expected. Sometimes people asked if she planned to forgive her family. Claire thought about that carefully. "I already did," she said once. "I forgave myself for staying so long." That was the part no one talked about. Forgiveness wasn't always about letting others back in. Sometimes it was about letting yourself move forward without carrying blame that was never yours to begin with. The money that had been returned stayed untouched for a while. Not because she didn't need it, but because she didn't want it to define the ending. When she finally used it, it was practical. A down payment. A safety net. Something that belonged to her, fully and without strings. That felt like justice enough. Claire never received an apology. She never received an explanation that made things right. And eventually she realized she didn't need either. Closure hadn't come from conversation. It had come from clarity. From facts laid out plainly. From seeing who stayed silent when it mattered and who only spoke when control was threatened. Years later, when she thought about her family, the emotions were muted. Not erased, just settled. She didn't wish them harm. She didn't wish them access either. Distance, she had learned, wasn't punishment. It was protection. Peace had entered her life quietly and stayed because it was earned. Claire used to believe family meant access, who could reach you, rely on you, take from you without asking. She knew better now. Love wasn't measured by how much you gave until nothing was left. It was measured by whether you were still seen when you stopped giving. Looking back, the message that morning hadn't ended her family ties. It had exposed them. "We no longer trust you," hadn't been a judgment. It had been a confession. They didn't trust her because she had stopped being manageable. And that, Claire realized, was not a failure. It was growth. Claire didn't lose her family. She stopped financing a role that erased her. In the quiet that followed, she built a life that didn't require permission, explanation, or sacrifice disguised as love. And for the first time, she felt something she had never been allowed to feel before. Whole. At peace. Moral lesson. Sometimes family doesn't leave you outgrow the role they assigned you. Love that only exists when you give endlessly is not love. Choosing peace over obligation is not betrayal, it's self-respect.